All right, everyone, welcome to the class. Um, we have Abayomi, Dale, and Ihama. Welcome to the class. Okay, so in today's class, to we are going to look at request bodies. And before I get started with that, I would love to ask if you have any issue on what we treated in the last class. Like in the last class, we talked about path parameters and query parameters as well. So do you have any questions so far concerning what we did there? So Dale, do you have any question concerning the last class? Is there anything that you had issues understanding or just anything? Okay. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. So, like I mentioned earlier, in the last class, we were looking at path parameters and query parameters. And in this specific class, in today's class, we are going to look at how to work with request bodies. And you may be wondering what a request bodies really is. So when you are when client needs to send data down to your API, that's down to your endpoint, most of the times, let's say majority of the times, they need to use the request body. All right. Let's say you are building an API for user registration. All right. And during user registration, the user may need to input so many information, like the first name, the last name, the email, the password. Like there could be a whole lot of information, right? So trying to concatenate all this information, trying to append all this information to the URL, right, so that it can be sent as a request, as a path parameter or query parameter will be too verbose. It will be too cumbersome. It won't really make a lot of sense. So that's where the request body comes in. Right? It's cleaner to package this data to JSON and then send it over as a request body. So that's what today's class will be all about. All right, we are going to build endpoints that would expect this kind of data from the clients, get this kind of data from the clients, and process this kind of data from the clients. Then we are also going to look at um, response body. You I think the first class also, when we were talking about the anatomy of a web request cycle, we mentioned that the client makes a request the uh, and it also receives a response. All right, so we're going to really look into this response body. How does it really work and all of that? So I think with that, I guess we are ready to start. So like we've been doing in the previous classes, the very first thing we need to do is to install fast. Okay, not install fast API. We need to create a virtual environment. First thing first. Then when we are done creating the virtual environment, we are going to install fast API and then create a project. So I'm going to start work on that now. Okay, so with this, I've created a virtual environment. When it's done creating, we need to activate this virtual environment and install fast API. All right, our virtual environment has been created. So the next step is to actually activate this environment. Don't forget that if you don't activate the virtual environment, whatever you are installing from pip will install to your global Python environment, which could end up messing things up. So we need to activate it. All right, next step is to install fast API, and we'll do that with pip install fast API. And since I want to install like all the dependencies that fast API needs to function, right, I'm going to pass in the all parameter. Okay, so I believe you're all seeing my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, so our fast API has been installed. Now we are going to create the file, like the server file that we need to work with, I'll be working with. Right, so I think I will call this one main. Okay, let me call it server. So this is the file we are going to use to create all our endpoints. And the very first thing we need to do is to import the fast API class, just like we did in the previous class. So that will be from fast API import, okay, import fast API. All right. So with that, we have um, what we need, like the class we need to actually instantiate our application. But since we are going to work with request bodies in this particular class, we need something else, right? We need something else. And I'll explain more when we start using these two things. I'll explain more what they really do. So the very first thing we are going to import is the optional class from typing. Right, so from typing, we're going to import optional. So actually, we use this optional to just like the name implies, to mark a field as optional. Like this particular field is optional. The user doesn't need to enter this field, right? So that's really the basic use. Then the next thing we are going to import is base model from Python. So we're going to do that from Python import import base model. So I think this is the first time we are working with base model, or we are working with Python. So this base model is a class that is used to specify the kind of data you want to actually receive from your client. Right, that's from the front end in this case. So when you are like the registration example I gave earlier at the start of this class. So if you are creating an endpoint that gets registration data from the front end, it's a good idea to like prepare, should I say, a schema, like what kind of data do you want to get from these guys. All right, you shouldn't give them the leeway to maybe provide any data that they want. All right, you need to specify what kind of data you want and in what format do you need this data to be sent to you, to be sent to your endpoint. I mean, so that's what we use the base model. That's what we use the base model for. So we are going to, okay, maybe before I get to that, let me instantiate the fast API class, and we're going to create a dummy endpoint. Like for now, it will not receive anything. You know, it's a dummy endpoint that will just return hello world for now. Then we start building from there. So first thing is to define our app, and our app is equal to this fast API class that we imported. So we're instantiating the fast API class and storing it in app. And we're going to create one endpoint that accepts a post request. All right, and for now it will just return hello world, and we'll test that out. Okay, actually, let me call this register instead. So for now, it's going to return just hello world. All right, so for now, let us run this and see what we have on the browser. Rubicon server, okay, load. Okay, now we have a server running at localhost and at port 8000. So I'm going to test this out with my clients. All right, so as you can see, we have a simple generic hello world message. All right, it's nothing fancy for now. It's nothing fancy for now. So let me pause here for questions. I believe there should be some of us that were not present in the first class. Do you have any question on this so far? Any question? Is any question so far?
Sorry, I'm just joining now, but I was in the last class. I don't have a question. At least I understand. I don't know what I've missed in this class so far, but based on last class, I understand.
Okay. So far we've not done much in this class for now. We just started, so you've not missed anything. All right, so no questions from everyone. That's perfect. That's perfect. So let me switch back to my VS Code and we'll proceed from there. All right. So right now we have created an endpoint to accept user registration. But for now, it's a dummy, right? It doesn't do anything. It just gets a post request and it no, it doesn't accept any data. It doesn't do anything. It just returns hello world, right? So we are going to modify this endpoint so that this endpoint can actually get some data, right? So that it can actually get some data. And the main aim here is to like show you how to get data with the request body. Right? So we are going to define a schema using this pedantics base model we imported. And we are going to look at how to return a response body. All right. You know, when a request comes in, you process the request and then give back a response body. We're going to look at that as well. Right? So let's get to work. The very first thing we need to do when declaring a schema is to declare a class, all right, with the name of that schema. So what I mean is this: we'll first declare class, and we'll call this particular schema register data. So we'll call this particular schema register data. And why I'm calling it register data is because this is the data that the user needs to actually register. And you can call it any name actually. You don't need to call it register data. It can be any name. Then, like I mentioned at the start of the class, we need to inherit this base model. Don't forget, I think in the last 2 or 3 classes, when we looked at object-oriented programming, we spoke about inheritance, class inheritance, all right, in which you can have a parent class and a child class. This is exactly what is happening here. Our base model is the parent class, and this register data, or let me call it register schema instead. This register schema is the child class that inherits from the parent class. So to inherit a class from another class, you simply pass in that class, right? In this case, something like this, base model. So when you are when we are registering, there are some data that you get from the front end. All right. So this data that you need is what we are going to try and replicate here. And let me share my browser. Sorry, please give me a minute. Okay. Okay, so I want to check out Facebook registration, and let us see the kind of data they get, and we'll try to model that too in our own toy server that we are building. Okay, so as you can see here, we have first name, they get first name, then they get surname, that's the last name, and they are collecting a mobile number or email address. Okay, we'll go with email address here. Then they're also collecting the password, so we'll go with that too. And date of birth, we'll go with that too, and the gender, right? So let us model this with our own API. The very first thing we need is the first name. And one thing about this this base model is that it gives you that capability to define the kind of type, the kind of data you are looking for. All right. So in this case, first name should actually be a string. All right. It should be a string. There's no need for someone to have a first name that's a number like 1, 2. It doesn't make any sense, right? So we are going to ensure that whatever data is passed in is a string. To do that, we simply declare the type here, string, right? Then the Facebook sign up also required a surname. So we are going to define that too. And since it is a name, it should also be a string. So we are going to make sure that it is a string. Now, the next thing is a password. So I'll call this password. And as usual, the password should also be string. Then we have date of birth. We have date of birth, and we also have gender. So date of birth, which should also be a string, and gender, which should also, for now, which should also be a string. As we progress in the class, we are going to look at how to make use of enums. Right, enums. It's let's say we can take, for example, this gender. Right, we have male, then we have female, and then we have other. Right. So there's no need for someone to enter something different from these three. All right. We know very well that gender will be any of these three. All right. So using just string here will make it possible for someone to enter, for example, hello world, all right, which is not a gender. So that's where the enum comes in. If we used the enum here, if we declare the type as enum here, it would throw an error if the user actually enters something that is not what we expect. But for now, we are not going to look at that for now. All right, so everything we've used here so far is a string. Is a string, but I need to I need to try something else.
Why
Okay.
not we add phone number?
Okay. Let's add phone number so that we use int there. Phone number so that we can use int there, and we add email. Yeah. So this is basically it, right? We are going to collect the first name, the surname, the password, date of birth, gender, phone number, and email. And all of them are of type strings, except phone number, which is int. Now, as for this email, a string would work perfectly, right? But we need some extra validation so that someone will not enter something like, take for example, someone can easily enter something like this, which of course is not a valid email, right? It's not a valid email. So thankfully, Pydantic also provides us with something else that's another data type that we can use in place of string. That is for the data type we expect for email. It is called email string. Right? So this type will ensure that whatever is submitted by the user is an email. So if a user should, if the client should send something like this, it will be rejected. Now we are going to replace this string with the email string we have imported. Now I imported this optional here, but I have not used it, right? So I'm looking for a way to use it now. Okay, let us use it at this gender point, right? What I want to do here is that I want this gender field to be optional, like the name implies, like the name optional there implies. I want this particular field to be optional, meaning the user is free to enter this field, all right? The user is also free to leave the field. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this string with optional. So I'm going to wrap the string with optional. Now, we are going to give it a default value, all right? So if a user, since this gender field is optional, all right, so what if a user does not enter that field? What do we want to get? What do you want to get? You could make it none if you wish to. This would mean that if the user doesn't enter anything, the field will default to none. But I don't want it to default to none. All right. If the user doesn't enter anything, I want it to default to female. So that is it. With this, we have created the schema, like the kind of data that we are expecting from the front end. All right. If this data is not provided, it will throw an error. It will return an error. Okay. So I would love to pause here for questions. Like, do you have any question concerning it? You are free to ask now before we proceed.
Okay. Just if I to be sure I understand this Pydantic, is it like a data? Is it the data? I know the other day I asked a question about the database package you are using, so I don't know whether
Yeah.
this is the one you mentioned or
No,
it's
it's
another
not.
one.
It's not. No, it's not.
Okay.
The Pydantic is a library in Python that is used for data validation. It's
Okay.
one of the popular data validation libraries that we have in Python. So the database is coming up in, I think, after next class or after the next two classes. I'm not yet sure for now, but that is coming up soon. Right?
Okay.
Pydantic
No problem.
is just for data validation.
Okay.
Okay, please. Do we have any other questions on that? All right, I believe there is no other question. So we are going to proceed. But if you should have any question, please feel free to drop a message in the chat and I'm going to look at it. So just like we did in the last class, when we are accepting a path parameter or a query parameter, right, we are going to pass this schema that we've defined, like this register schema that we've defined as an argument to this function we want to execute when the post request comes to the register endpoint. So what I mean is this: we can say register data, then of type, please, of type register schema. So we'll copy this and paste it. So with this, like with this small change, this endpoint is going to accept this kind of data. So to show that the data has actually been accepted, I don't want to return the hello world again. I want to return that same data. Like whatever we got from the front end, I want to like send it back to them. So register data. That's what we want to return. And to maybe mimic a normal server, just to mimic a normal server, I'm going to implement a delay, maybe a 2-second delay. Like, we are going to mimic a normal server. When you send your registration data, the server needs to process the data, send the emails that it needs to send, do everything that it needs to do before sending the response, right? So I'm going to make that here too. And we do that with time. We do that with the time package in Python, and it's a time.sleep. Time.sleep. I want it to sleep. So I want this to sleep for 3 seconds. So please take note that this is not necessary, right? It's not absolutely necessary. I'm just trying to, mimic a real life scenario, right? When the data comes to the server for an operation like registration, right? It requires interaction with the database, putting data to the database, maybe extracting data from the database as well. So this takes time, right? It doesn't happen instantaneously. Hence, the need to add this time of sleep so that the server will sleep for 6 seconds before returning the data. Okay, with this, we are ready to test. With this, we are ready to test this. Okay, I believe you can now see my test lines, right?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So now let us try sending this empty body to the server and see what happens. Yes, can you see this? We now have a validation error, unlike the first time, right? That first time we didn't have any validation error. In this case, we get the error that body is missing. Right? We have not attached the request body to this request. So the server has told us that this is actually missing. So we are going to attach the data that we need and try this again. So our data is going to be in JSON format. So the first thing we needed was first name. Then after first name, we needed the last name, the surname. Then we needed the password. We also needed the date of birth and all of that. So let's start with first name. Then after first name, we accepted surname as well. So our surname will be me. And we need a password as well. Then we also need the date of birth. So the next data we need is the gender, and don't forget that our gender is an optional field. We don't need to pass in anything there. Okay. So for now, let us make it optional. Let us not pass anything for now. Then we have phone number. So our phone number, I'm going to use this. Don't forget it is an int, right? So I'm going to use that. Then the last thing is the email. I'm going to use Python at KodeCamp .org. So that's the email we're working with. Now let's send this to the server and see if we have any errors. Good. So can you see this?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah. So this is the response body. All right. We sent a request body that contained the first name, the surname, the password, the date of birth, then the phone number and the email. And according to what we defined in the server, let me switch back to my VS Code so that I can check it out again. Yeah. According to what we defined in our server, the endpoint, the register endpoint gets this data, this register data, and then sleeps for 2 seconds to mimic that processing, like the processing of data, and it then does nothing to the data. It just sends that data back to the front end. And also take note that this gender is a string, right? And an optional string with a default value of female. That is why despite the fact that we didn't send the gender data, we still get a gender response. Please, do you have any question on that for now? We'll see.
Okay. This data you entered in the JSON file now. What if you didn't enter it in the order, like maybe you entered surname first before you entered last name, does it affect?
No, it doesn't. So let us switch this up. Let's switch this up and see if it affects. All right, so let's send a request again and check if it's right. So as you can see, it does not. It doesn't.
Okay.
Now, since our gender is we have not defined the value, all right, and the default value is set to female. Let us actually define this gender and see what happens. All right, so let our gender be male, and let us see what happens in this case. All right, as you can see, we now get a male there. So if we supply any value for an optional data, the value will be returned to us, like the value will be accepted, and we can work with that. But if we don't, right, the default value will be picked, and we work with that too. Then let us really see the importance of the email string that we spoke about earlier. Don't forget here, we have this email string. All right. So let us really see its importance. Let me go back to my request lines and maybe put something else here and see what happens. All right. So as you can see here, the data has been rejected, and the message is that the value is not a valid email address. So for now, let me pause for questions. Like, do you have any questions so far on these? We've spoken about Pydantic, we've spoken about base model, we've spoken about class inheritance. Then we are now speaking about these optional values, email strings, and all of that. So do you have any questions so far?
Not really. I'm guessing this Pydantic, shouldn't it also have a, does it have a data validation for date of birth also? Since it's a kind of date.
I don't really think so, but let us check. I don't think it does. No, I don't think it does. But for questions like this, we can always look at the documentation. So let me change back to my browser so that we can check the Pydantic documentation and see. So this is the documentation itself, pydantic-docs.helpmanual.io. Since this URL is too long to remember, you can just search Pydantic on Google and it should take you to this. So this is the base model we were talking about. So that's the same thing used here and all of that. So
okay.
Let us search for okay, let's check field types first. Standard library field types, the booleans, floats. So what we are seeing here are these field types that we used in our register schema. Can you see my VS Code?
Yes, I can see your VS Code.
Okay, VS Code. Okay, so these are the these types that we declared here. All right. Okay. I believe you can see my browser, right?
Yes, your browser, yes.
Okay. So apart from that string, it also accepts other types like bool. This is boolean, which is something like true or false. Then it also accepts integers. and it also accepts float. When we say float, we're referring to decimal, something like 0 point something, or maybe 3 point something, 4 point something. That's what we call float in Python. And we've seen string, we've seen bytes, then lists. List is like it's for those of us that are coming from the front-end background, lists is arrays in JavaScript. All right, so it accepts something like that too. It also accepts a tuple, dictionary, set, and all that. Then let's scroll down. You can, on your free time, maybe after this class, you can go through the documentation. Pydantic.docs.helpmanual.io/usage/types, and you then go through these types that are acceptable. So I'm going to check if they are other types that it accepts. Pydantic types, types, size. Okay, I can't find anything here. So let me search for email string. Proceed. This is Boolean. Example types, Pydantic types. Okay, right. So these are some of the types that it accepts. Right. Apart from email string, we have other things like the file path, like a directory path. If you want to accept file path, you can use that. You can use the directory path if you want to accept the directory path. Then pass the email string, name email, file object, color.
Okay.
There's a color type, like if you are from front end type, if you work with front end before, the CSS and HTML color types. You can also text JSON and all of that. So when you are free, you can go through this and look at it.
All right. Although I'm even seeing on that same page on my laptop, I can see date time. There's a field type called date time. They're like different dates and fields. Yeah. So, but I'll check that.
Yes, there is. This is it. You can actually receive a date time from the front end as well. So, for example, from date time, import date time. Right. So with that, you can declare this particular place as date time. But please note, this date time is not the format that we entered here.
Okay.
All right. It's not the format that we entered here. If we enter this, it will throw an error. What that date time means is, let me show you my command line. Can you see my bash command line now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, right. So you can also interact with Python on the command line with Python 3. So with this, we have the Python environment, and I can then import datetime from datetime. Let's import from datetime, import datetime. Okay. Now, datetime.now gets the current time, like the current time you make that particular execution. So we now have this particular object. All right, that is the exact time at this moment. This is the year, this is the month. The year is 2022, the month is April, that's good. And the day is 14th. Today is 14th April. and this is the time. The time is 14 to 2, and it is 2. Right? It's 2 o'clock. That's 13 minutes past 2, right, where I am right now. And 2 is 14 if you use the 24-hour format. And this is the minute, this is the second, and this is the millisecond. The last this is the millisecond. So if you want to take the time in UTC, that's the time zone at the time at GMT, right? It will be the same year, the same day, the same year, the same month, then the same day. Then the time is a little bit different. Don't forget that I'm in Nigeria at the moment, so my time is plus one, meaning 1 hour ahead of GMT. So that means if my time is 2 in the afternoon, GMT will be 1 hour behind that, which is 1 in the afternoon.
Okay.
So that's just it. And this is the kind of dates, this is the kind of data that is accepted at this point, this place. So if you should enter something else, it will be rejected. Right. So since we are interacting with this using our request clients, I don't have the means at the moment to actually generate this data on the fly. But of course, if we were interacting with this with our clients, like maybe a mobile app or the website, we can use JavaScript. Like for website, we can use JavaScript to generate the current time. Right. Then for mobile app, we can, if it's Flutter, you can get the current time. Or React Native, you can use JavaScript to get the current time. But in this case, we don't have the means to do that. So there's no need to use this date time here because it will give us issues.
No problem.
So we are going to default back to string. Oh. Okay, so we are going to default back to string. Now, going back to this, most times when you're working with times on your server, you need to use UTC time, that's GMT. Like you shouldn't use the time whereby you shouldn't use the current time of where the server is. What I mean is, I showed you something like datetime.now, right? Datetime.now picks the time of my computer at this point, right? It takes the time of my computer at this point. While datetime.utc now takes the time at GMT, that's a GMT time, right? Using datetime.now would be problematic. That would be very problematic. Take for example, we are hosting this API on the AWS, and the region is US East 1. The region is US East 1. So if you are storing your dates, like whenever a user is sending data, you are picking the dates at that point, and you are using the local time, it will give you issues later on, right? It will give you issues later on. It's always easier to make use of UTC now, so that you can always, wherever you deploy the server, you can always make conversions, right? Convert the time to whatever time zone you wish to convert to at any point. So that's that for that. Let us go back to okay, someone asks a question here. I have a question about validating phone number. Is it possible or is just a string? I think it should be possible, but I don't really know. Let's check Pydantic if it's possible. Okay, can you see my browser?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay, so let's check the Pydantic types if there's anything that helps us validate phone numbers. We have IP address, negative hints, positive hints. Nope, nothing, nothing. But I think there should be something on the internet. Validate phone number in Python. All right, let's see. Stack is how do I validate phone number in Python? This is Stack Overflow, so let's see what happens here. Someone asked this exact question that was 8 years ago, and he was trying to actually validate a phone number. Let's see if there was a solution to the problem. Import phone numbers. I recommend to use the import phone numbers package, which is a Python port of Google's number library. Okay. Though this answer wasn't accepted anyways, but it has a lot of upvotes, 21 upvotes. All right. So it shows that the answer is useful. So now, before we even use this phone numbers package, let us see if it is still maintained. Okay, it's maintained. The latest release is April 1st, 2022, and today is April 14th. Yes, so it's safe to use. Installation. You may be wondering why I'm doing this. All right, I always feel it's a good thing to like learn how to make research on your own, and it's always very helpful to like know how to uh, look at the documentation, when you're stuck, because if you're depending on the teacher to like teach everything, it will be very difficult to show you everything. All right, so it's always nice to have that experience of going through the documentation, like researching things on your own. That's what makes a great developer, actually. So to use this phone number package, you pip install phone number, then you import it here. Then you then get a phone number. X is equal to phone number that pass and pass the string. Okay. Then print national number. It is a force type. Print Y. Pass. Is it country code 1? Phone number this within zeros false. Okay, do you know what? Maybe on your own free time you can go through this and see if you'll be able to like validate the phone number that is provided, using this phone number package. All right, and another option is someone provided another solution that's using regex to actually do the validation, and that particular solution was accepted. So you could try that too and check out if it works. If it works for you. Okay, please, do you have any other question before we proceed to the data validation?
None from my end.
Okay. Please, any other question? All right, I believe there is none. So we are going to look at how to actually use both the request body and the path parameter and also query parameter. All right, you don't need to use one at the same time. One endpoint can accept a request body. It can also accept a path parameter, and it can also accept a query parameter. So I am going to try and illustrate that now. Okay, Okay, so there's a question on the chat. Let me check that out first. Okay. All right, please give me a minute. I want to copy and paste the code because we do not have enough time to type. So I'll copy and paste, then I am going to explain it for us. Okay. So let me create a new server file, and I'll call this server2.py. Oh, sorry. It's touch. You want to create a file with the Linux command line. So I'm going to test this. Why I'm testing is because we have less than 30. We have about 30 minutes left, so I won't really have the time to type all of this. Okay. So as usual, we first imported optional from typing, and that's line 1. Then at line 3, we imported fast API from fast API, and we also imported base model from Pydantic. Then we created an item class that inherits from base model. So this is the kind of data we are expecting from the front end, and each item has a name field, which is a string. It has a description field, which is an optional string that defaults to none. So if the user doesn't supply this data, it defaults to none. Then we have price, which is float. So a float is basically something like this, 7 point something, like any number that involves a point. Right? That is what we call a float in Python. Then we also have tax, which is an optional float that defaults to none. Okay, so what we aim to do here is that we want to create an endpoint that accepts both this item. All right, it accepts both this item, and then it also accepts a path parameter. Can you see this item ID? So that is the path parameter that we are referring to. So as usual, we declare the path parameter here. That we pass it as an argument to the function that will be executed when a request comes to this endpoint. So the item ID, and then we declare the item, that's the request body. And you may have asked, I don't know why no one has asked, how will the fast API know which one is path parameter and which one is the request body?
Okay, I don't know.
Okay, how will it know? Does anyone wish to attempt a solution?
I don't really know.
Okay. So the thing is, whenever we have a Pydantic, like for example, find this class item that inherits from base model, right? It is a Pydantic schema, right? So whichever thing we pass in here, whichever arguments we pass in here that is of type of a Pydantic schema is automatically interpreted as a body. All right. Like in this case, we have item that is of type item, and this item is this class that we defined here that inherits from base model. All right. So since it is inheriting from base model, fast API automatically concludes that it is a request support. All right. Then we have another one we have this item ID that is present in the URL, right? And it also appears here in this function arguments. Then the API, like fast API, would then know that, okay, this is automatically a path parameter. Then if we have something else, like maybe Joe, right, that is of type string, fast API will automatically conclude that this is a query parameter. But why is it so? Because this q is not present in the path, all right, and it doesn't have a type that is a pedantic class. That is why fast API knows that it is a query parameter. So this is how you combine both the this is how you combine both the request body, the path parameter, and the query parameter. So let's try this out on our test client. So that will be Python server 2.5. Oh, sorry. It is actually Uvicon, not server 2.5. So let us run this on our test client and see what happens. Okay, as for this item, we want to, as for the item ID, we want to use one, and the item body, right? The item body, we have name, only name and the price is compulsory. The rest are optional. So let's do that. Oh, can you see my test client?
No, VS Code.
Okay, oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay, so the only data that is compulsory there is the name and the price. So our price is a float, right? So it will be, let us say 4.98, and the name is test. So let's send this request and see what happens. Method null post, let's check. Okay. So we only accept a put request here, not post. So that's why we have that error that the method is not allowed. Now we're going to change this to a put request and send the request again. Okay, so as you can see, we've captured the item ID, right? Then we have the name, the description, the price, and the tax. Okay, do you have any question on that? Is any question so far?
Okay, no question. Since we made the description
No question.
of tax optional.
Okay.
The
I'm actually expecting a question, but I don't know why no one has asked.
Wait, let me see first.
Okay. I'm expecting a question. I'm surprised. Okay.
Okay, we use a put request. Okay, well, I don't know. They are like, for example, this put. I know that put is used to like store data. Is it to update? Yes, to update. So I don't know. I thought we're also supposed to create like a okay, post is used to create a record, then put is used to update, but
Yes,
you
shift
can
okay.
okay. Um, okay. I don't really know. The only time it says, okay, since we have not maybe set up a database, I don't know where this is being stored. I don't know.
Okay, at the moment we are not storing anything. All right, we are just decorating the endpoint as put. And the thing is, it is not actually compulsory for you to update data with puts. All right, you can update data with get. There's no issue. All right, it's just that the convention is to update it with put and then create with post, delete with delete. All right. When we get to the project section, you will really see this in action. So the main question that I was expecting from the class is this. We have two asterisks. All right. Why do we have it there? Why is it there? Were you wondering why it's there?
I I don't know. I know the other part of Python where I know they use something like two asterisks when they're doing something about keyword arguments. So I don't know
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
it's the same thing here.
Okay. So this two asterisks is the spread operator, right? It is used to like spread these items we got, right? We got these items from the front end, okay, and we are returning them. What this does is it spreads the dictionary. For example, it carries the name, the description, the price, and the tax data and puts them all in this one dictionary that we are returning instead of nesting the dictionaries. That is why we have this spread operator. Now, this date method you are seeing here, it converts this pedantic class that we got from the front end into a dictionary that we can work with. Okay, hope you understand now.
Yes.
Another way to do this would have been to, as you can see, we have a return item ID. This item ID in a string code, this is the key, right? It is the key. And dictionaries are basically key value pairs. All right. This item ID in string code is the key, while this other item ID without the string code is the value. All right. So another way to go about this would have been to say maybe something like define items and give it this. Right. So if you do this, this is what we are going to do. Let's switch back to our request client. Okay, so if we send note the difference. Can you see the difference? We have item ID, then we have items before the data that are available in items, right? So
Yeah.
using that spread operator helped us to, it helped us to avoid that and put everything in one dictionary instead of having nested dictionaries. Right. So using something like this enables us to just put everything in one dictionary at once, like so. You see, know the difference. All right. So can you see this?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's why we needed to use those two. Um, that's why we needed to use those two asterisks there. So we have gone a long way, and time is running out. Let me see if we can do a little bit of validation before we end the class for today. Please give me a minute. All right, so it is possible to actually specify, all right, it's possible to actually specify the kind of like, how do I even explain it? For example, in this data we are receiving, like name here, take this name for example, we are getting just string, right? The user is free to enter anything he or she wants to enter, right? So it's possible to actually restrict that. It's possible to restrict that by maybe determining, okay, or by maybe specifying things like the maximum length, like the data that I'm expecting here, what kind of length is it supposed to be? What kind of length is it not supposed to be? Right? Why this is necessary is because, when you are creating, when we get to the database section, all right? So when you are creating databases with maybe things like purpose or RM, there has to be limits. For example, each database field may have a max length of something like 300 characters, meaning you cannot store something, you cannot store a string that is more than 300 characters in that particular field. All right. So if we had that kind of setup and we are accepting this from the user and then sending it to the database, it will cause an error. It will cause a 500 error. That's a server error. If the user peradventure enters data that is too big or maybe too huge for the particular database field to handle. So that is why that's why we have the field. Oops, sorry. That is why we have the pedantic field. So this field is another kind of validator that helps us should I say, do more things or specify more things, maybe define the max length, the minimum length that is accepted for that particular field and the rest of that. So let us see that in action. I'm going to copy and paste a piece of code and we are going to explain that. We are going to explain that. Okay, so let's paste this. So can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah, so you can then specify the max length. We can say that the max length is maybe 7. We can define it here. The max length is 7. That means that if the user should enter anything more than 7 characters, it will be rejected from our end. So let's see an action. First, let us test that this is working. Okay, this is less than 7. Is it working? Yes, it's working. So let us increase this to above 7 and see if it will be rejected. Yes, so as you can see here, we have ensure this value has at most 7 characters. So this field parameter is one of the things that you can use to restrict the input of the user to your server. Right? Apart from defining only the types, you can restrict the input. For example, a user has no reason to have a name that is above 300 characters, right? So you can then come here and then define that, hey, you cannot give me a name that is up to 300 characters, right? So it really helps to avoid the kind of errors I mentioned earlier while saving things in the database. Okay, and you can also determine the minimum length for example, minimum length, we can specify that the minimum length is 3, meaning anything less than 3 digits will throw an error. Okay, so let's check that out. If we enter like 2 characters, we should have an error too. Let's ensure this value has at least 3 characters. So there's a whole lot of things in this particular the validation area. You can also validate float fields, determine you can validate float fields, you can validate integer fields, like determine like what kind of integer are you expecting, should it be greater than a certain amount, should it be less than a certain amount, and all of that. So what I need you to do is to go to the fast API documentation. All right. Then you go to the tutorial section and this field. Yes, using this URL. Sorry about that. So go to the fast API documentation, fastapi.triangular.com, then /tutorial, then /body-fields. So this that particular section of the documentation explains, gives some examples on the validation. All right, on the validation, how you can validate the data, that is the request body, I mean. Then we also have information on how you can validate the query parameters, how you can validate the path parameters. So you can check that out in the documentation. And if you have any question, if you have anything you don't really understand, you are free to reach out to me on Slack, and I'll be very, very happy to explain it in more detail to you. So before we end the class for today, please, do you have any question on what we've done so far? Is there anything you don't really understand so that I can explain again?
Question, sir?
Not question from my end. I can research the other things.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, that's perfect. So like I've been saying since day one of this class, the most important thing about software development, about software engineering, is research. Right? It's really, really important. It's really, really important. And I promise you that this class will be a whole lot about research. Like we'll be going through the documentation a lot, and some things we'll have to search for it. We'll have to go to Stack Overflow, like we did for that phone number validation. All right, you can do that, and I think it is possible to pass in regular expressions to this field. It's possible to pass in regular expressions to this field, but I am not sure. I'm not certain, but you can actually look that up in the documentation as well. Right. So if you have any question, as you are going to the docs, if you have any question, you are free to get in touch with me, and I'll do everything I can to explain it in greater detail. So in the absence of any question, this would be.
I have a question.
Okay. What's your question?
Okay. So in the field aspect, if the argument you pass into the field, whether you pass in the maximum length and the minimum length, you started some dots and comma before the minimum length.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So I understand your question. So what this means is that I was expecting the question and I kind of forgot. So what this basically means is that when you see this, when the first parameter of this field is 3 dots, it means that this particular field is required. All right. this field is required. That's what that means. So if a field has a default value, for example, something like me, right? So this would be the default value, right? So take for example, um, the description that is optional, right? Take for example the description that is optional, right? The default value there is not. So this first parameter you're seeing here, this 3 dots, is the place for the default value, correct? And if you have 3 dots, it means that there's no default value, that particular field is required. Okay. Oh, can you see my screen? Did you see my screen?
I can see the insomnia.
Oh, there.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. So this is what I mean actually. Okay, so when you have these 3 dots, it basically means that particular field is required. Like the name field is required, all right? There's no default value. Okay, so if that particular field was optional, right? It was an optional field. The first parameter there will be the default value that you want to pass in if that particular value is not provided. Like in the description field, we accept a string, but it is optional. So if a user does not pass in that the value for string, we want the default to be none. So as a result, I remove those 3 dots and then replaced it with none. So this is the same thing as using something like this. Right? And in the case that the data is provided, it will be validated that the max length shouldn't pass 300 characters and the minimum length shouldn't be below 3 characters. Okay. Do you understand that?
I understand.
Okay, please. Any other question? All right. In the absence of a question, we'll end this class for today. Tomorrow is Good Friday, so I am not sure if we'll have a class at this point. I don't know. But you will be notified if there will be a class, but I am not sure right now. Right? So thanks for attending. I really appreciate it. Thank you all. And to recap, go to, when you are free, go to fastapi.ambulu.com. That's the official website. Then go to the tutorials and look at body fields. Right? It explains this in greater detail, what we said here in greater detail. And if you have any question, if you have anything you don't understand, you are free to send me a message on Slack and I'll do everything I can to explain it better to you. So thanks for, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.